Welcome back, everyone. Ready for another deep dive? This time we're heading to the Colorado Rockies, to a place that's as stunning as it is spooky.
The Stanley Hotel.
You got it. Perched high in Estes Park, this grand old hotel isn't just a place to spend the night. It's practically a living legend, a place where history meets the supernatural.
Right, and it's earned a reputation as one of America's most haunted hotels, and with good reason. Guests report all kinds of strange things happening. Unexplained noises, ghostly figures, that feeling like you're being watched, but you're all alone.
Oh, I'm already getting chills. And we can't talk about the Stanley without mentioning its connection to one of the most iconic horror novels ever written.
Stephen King's The Shining, of course.
Exactly. Remember that terrifying story?
Mm.
A family snowed in at a remote hotel, all kinds of dark forces at play.
And the really eerie part is that King himself had a pretty unsettling experience at the Stanley back in the 70s. He was the only guest. It was right before the hotel closed for winter, and he had this vivid nightmare. That nightmare became the seed for The Shining.
Talk about inspiration. But before we get into the spooky stuff, I want to know more about how this majestic hotel came to be. I know it all started with a man named F.O. Stanley. Wasn't he a brilliant inventor?
He was. He and his twin brother invented the Stanley Steamer automobile. It was a big deal back then. But in the early 1900s, F.O. was diagnosed with tuberculosis. His doctors told him, "Get yourself to the fresh mountain air of Colorado." So he and his wife, Flora, traveled to Estes Park, this beautiful valley high up in the Rockies.
They were hoping nature would be the cure.
Exactly. And it worked. Stanley's health improved dramatically. He was so blown away by the area's beauty and serenity that he decided to build a luxurious hotel there. He wanted others to experience the same healing he did.
So the Stanley Hotel was born from a love story, a man falling for the mountains that saved him.
You could say that. Stanley poured his heart into creating something truly grand. He wanted a beacon of elegance and sophistication, a place that could rival those fancy European hotels.
And this was 1909, right? I bet bringing modern amenities to such a remote location was quite the feat.
Oh, absolutely. The Stanley was designed in that grand Georgian revival style. Sweeping verandas, ornate fireplaces, spacious rooms with breathtaking mountain views. But Stanley didn't stop there. He was determined to make it a marvel of modern engineering. Electric lights, telephones in every room, even a hydraulic elevator. One of the first in the whole state of Colorado.
Wow, now that's impressive. It sounds like he wanted to create a haven of luxury and comfort, a true escape from the everyday world.
Exactly. And it quickly became a popular destination for the wealthy and elite, the place to be seen. But over the years, the hotel gained another kind of reputation, a bit more unsettling.
Okay, here we go. Time to talk about the ghosts.
Many people believe the Stanley is home to a number of spirits, including F.O. and Flora themselves. Guests and staff have reported seeing them strolling through the halls, dressed in old-fashioned clothing.
Still keeping an eye on their beloved hotel, even in the afterlife.
It seems so. Flora's presence is especially strong in the music room. She was known to play piano for hours, and guests still report hearing faint piano music, even when the room is empty.
Oh, that's eerie. Her love for music transcending life and death. But there's one room in particular that's known for its spooky happenings, right? Room 217.
Yes, room 217, the most infamous room at the Stanley. It's the room where Stephen King stayed, and the room that inspired The Shining.
So what happened to him in there?
Well, King says he had this terrifying nightmare. His young son was being chased down the hallways by, well, something evil. He woke up in a cold sweat, completely shaken.
I can see why that turned into a horror novel.
And that's not all. Over the years, guests in room 217 have reported luggage unpacking itself, lights flickering, feeling an unseen presence. Some even say they've seen Elizabeth Wilson. She was a housekeeper who was injured in the room years ago.
I am officially spooked. But the hauntings aren't just in room 217, right?
Mm.
What about the fourth floor? All those stories about children's laughter and footsteps.
That's right. The fourth floor, it was originally just an attic space. Later, they converted it to house female employees and their children. And many believe some of those children's spirits are still there.
So no peace and quiet. Instead, you might hear phantom kids playing. Terrifying. What have people experienced up there?
Children laughing, tiny footsteps running up and down the halls, even when there are no children around. Some guests have even felt like a child is in the room with them, sitting on the bed or tugging at their clothes.
Okay, my spine is tingling. And I've heard rooms 401, 407, and 418 are especially active.
Yes, they're hot spots for paranormal activity. Guests report cold spots, things moving on their own even. Phantom touches.
Like an invisible hand brushing against you.
Exactly. Chilling, isn't it?
Absolutely. And there's one story that really sticks with me. Room 418, and a guest who had a very strange experience with a mirror.
Ah, yes. This guest felt a childlike presence in the room. Then they saw these tiny handprints appear on the mirror, like a child had pressed their hands against it.
Creepy. But tell me more about some of the other haunted areas. What about the grand staircase? I heard it's more than just a beautiful feature.
It is. Imagine you're walking down those sweeping stairs, all alone, just the sound of your own footsteps echoing. Then you see a shadowy figure disappear around the corner.
Oh, I think I'd turn right back around.
I don't blame you. Many believe the energy of past guests and employees still lingers there, making it a focal point for paranormal activity.
And what about those tunnels under the Stanley? They sound like something out of a horror movie.
They do, don't they? They were originally for staff to move around discreetly, so they wouldn't disturb guests. But over time, they've gotten a bit of a sinister reputation.
What kinds of things have people experienced down there?
Guests and staff have both reported meeting a spirit named Paul in the tunnels. He's supposed to be a former employee, very serious about his job, especially when it came to the hotel's lights out rule. Even in the afterlife, he wants to make sure people follow the rules.
Some habits die hard.
Indeed. But Paul's not the only one down there. There's also Cassandra. Some guests say they feel a ghostly hand on their shoulder down there and hear faint whispers.
Wait, Cassandra? Like the Greek prophetess. The one cursed to see the future but never be believed. That makes the tunnels even creepier.
It certainly does.
And you mentioned something about a ghostly cowboy in room 428.
Several guests have said they've woken up to find a cowboy either at the foot of the bed or just standing there watching them sleep.
I can't imagine a more terrifying way to wake up.
Some people think he's friendly, though, just checking in on the guests.
I guess it depends on your perspective, right? Some people might find that comforting, others would be running for the hills.
Exactly. That's what makes the Stanley so fascinating. It's a place where history and the supernatural blend together. You can't tell where reality ends and the unknown begins. It really makes you think, doesn't it? Why some spirits seem drawn to certain places, like Flora and the music room. It's almost as if her love for music is keeping her there, even after all this time.
Yeah, that's fascinating. Like a part of them, their personality or their passion is somehow imprinted on that spot.
Exactly. And speaking of lingering spirits, there's another spot in the Stanley that's known for its, well, unusual activity, the Grand Concert Hall. Imagine it. Back in the day, lavish balls, elegant concerts, a hub of social gathering.
Oh, I bet. And now, it's said to be haunted by echoes of the past.
That's right. Guests and staff have reported seeing shadowy figures dancing across the stage, hearing faint music, almost like a phantom orchestra tuning up. Some even feel a sudden chill, or that feeling of being watched by unseen eyes.
Ooh, okay, I'm getting goosebumps just picturing it. It's like stepping back in time, but instead of history, it's the spirits that are preserved.
And that feeling of a presence, it's something people report all over the Stanley, even in places you wouldn't expect. Like the billiard room. Back in the day, it was a real gentleman's domain. Men playing billiards, smoking cigars, talking business and politics.
So a place filled with masculine energy, and maybe a few spirited debates.
Exactly. And some believe that energy is still there. Guests have reported hearing billiard balls even when the room is empty, or seeing a man in a tuxedo standing by the fireplace, lost in thought.
Like the ghosts are acting out scenes from their past lives.
That's an interesting way to put it. And that brings us to another spot with an eerie vibe. The Lord Dunraven Suite. It's named after the Earl of Dunraven. He was a British nobleman who owned a huge chunk of land in the Estes Park area back in the late 1800s.
So this suite has connections to the very beginnings of the area.
Exactly. And the story goes that Lord Dunraven, he was captivated by Estes Park, spent a lot of time exploring the wilderness. Some even say he had a secret cabin in the mountains where he'd entertain guests, a place to escape, enjoy the solitude. But there's a darker side to Dunraven's story, too.
Okay, I'm all ears.
Well, some say Dunraven wasn't entirely honest in his dealings with the Ute tribe. The Ute were the original inhabitants of the area. There are rumors that he cheated them out of their land and that his actions caused a lot of suffering and resentment.
That's a really sad chapter in the history of the West, and some believe his spirit is still in the suite named after him.
Right. Guests have reported all kinds of things in the Lord Dunraven suite. Doors opening and closing on their own, lights flickering, that feeling of someone there, but no one's there. And some have even seen a tall, distinguished man in Victorian clothing.
Wow, that's a lot of activity for one suite. Do you think it's all connected to Lord Dunraven, or could it be other spirits drawn to that space?
That's a great question, one that's puzzled paranormal investigators for years. Some think that the energy from Dunraven's dealings with the Ute tribe created a kind of spiritual vortex, attracting other spirits who might have experienced similar injustices, or who are searching for some kind of resolution.
So it's not just individual spirits. It's the layers of history of energy that are embedded in the place itself.
Precisely. And that's what makes the Stanley so captivating. It's not just a bunch of ghost stories, it's a window into human experience, the good and the bad.
Speaking of stories, what about that ghostly cowboy we talked about earlier? The one in room 428. I got to hear more about that.
Yes. The cowboy of room 428. He's become a bit of a legend at the Stanley. Some think he was a ranch hand who worked on the property back in the early days. Others say he was a guest who died during his stay.
And didn't you say some people find his presence comforting?
Some guests who've met him, well, they say he has a very calming presence, not menacing or scary, more like he's a guardian watching over them as they sleep.
Interesting. So instead of being terrified, they feel a sense of peace.
Exactly. It reminds us that not all ghostly encounters are bad. Sometimes they can be benevolent or even reassuring.
Which brings us back to that question, why do some spirits linger? If it's not always fear or anger, what else could it be?
That's a question that's been debated for centuries. Some say it's unfinished business, or maybe they're attached to a person or a place. Others think they're drawn to places with a lot of energy, a lot of emotional resonance.
So it could be love, loyalty, duty, or just a fondness for a certain time or place.
Precisely. And that's what makes the Stanley Hotel so compelling. It's a place where past and present collide, where the line between living and dead seems to blur, and where the stories of those who came before us are still echoing through the halls.
We've explored the hotel's history, dived into some seriously chilling hauntings, and even thought about why these spirits might be sticking around. But there's one more piece of the puzzle, isn't there? The people who've dedicated themselves to investigating this stuff.
Yes, the paranormal investigators. The ones who go into these places armed with EMF readers, EVP recorders, infrared cameras, all hoping to catch a glimpse of the other side.
From the hotel's grand beginnings to those chilling hauntings, it's clear the Stanley Hotel has a way of capturing your imagination.
It really does, and it's so much more than just ghost stories, isn't it? It's a place where history and the supernatural are intertwined, a real tapestry of mystery.
Yeah, it's like the building itself is alive, holding on to the stories, the energy of everyone who's ever walked those halls.
That's a great way to put it. Thinking back on all these stories, it's amazing how many different experiences people have had at the Stanley. Some of them are subtle, like faint music or a shadow out of the corner of your eye.
Right, and then there are the ones that really get under your skin. Objects moving, those phantom touches, or seeing an actual ghost right in front of you.
It's almost as if the line between our world and the spirit world is thinner there, like we're getting glimpses into something we don't fully understand.
It makes you wonder, what is it about this place? What makes it such a magnet for paranormal activity?
That's the question, isn't it? Maybe it's the location, nestled in those majestic mountains, a place where nature's power meets human history.
Or maybe it's all the human emotion that's soaked into the Stanley over the years, the joy of celebrations, the grief of those who've died there.
Interesting thought. Maybe those leftover energies create the perfect conditions for spirits to, make themselves known.
Whatever the reason, there's no denying the Stanley's allure. It makes us curious, it sparks our imagination, and it reminds us that there are mysteries in this world we may never solve.
And maybe that's part of what makes it so fascinating. The unknown keeps us wanting to explore, to dig deeper into the shadows.
So if you ever find yourself in Estes Park, Colorado, do yourself a favor and visit the Stanley Hotel. You might just experience a brush with the supernatural, a message from the past, a glimpse into the unseen.
And remember, even if you don't see or hear anything unusual, the stories themselves are enough to send chills down your spine. They make you wonder what's hidden within those grand old walls.
Okay, so let's kick things off with one of the biggest names in paranormal investigation, Ghost Adventures. Their investigation back in 2013 really put the Stanley on the map for, every ghost enthusiast.
Yeah, Zach Bagans and his team, they spent a good chunk of time at the hotel. They mainly focused on room 401.
Room 401. It seems like every haunted place has that one room, right?
It does, doesn't it? But 401, this one's got a long history of paranormal activity.
And didn't they bring a ton of equipment?
Yeah.
EMF detectors, voice recorders, thermal cameras, the whole lore.
Oh, absolutely. They went all out. And they reported some wild stuff too, like huge EMF spikes in 401, which, a lot of people believe could indicate the presence of spirits.
Okay, that's spooky. What else?
They also captured some pretty creepy sounds on their recorders. A woman's voice, really faint, calling out. It was definitely eerie.
Wow, I bet that sent chills down their spines.
Yeah.
But what about the skeptics? Have they weighed in on this? Could those sounds have been, I don't know, anything else?
Oh, for sure. Skeptics have their own explanations, like the EMF fluctuations. They say it could just be the old wiring in the Stanley, or even just the environment, an old building like that that's going to have some quirks.
That makes sense. And the voice?
Well, they might say it's just interference or maybe a distant noise that got picked up. Or even something called pareidolia, where our minds try to find patterns in random sound.
So like our brains are playing tricks on us.
In a way, yeah. But what about the Stanley Hotel's own ghost tours? Those are pretty fascinating. They take guests to places that are usually off limits, like the basement tunnels. Tons of people have reported strange things down there.
I bet that's a creepy experience.
Yeah.
As people are actually going into those tunnels.
Oh, yeah. And they often report seeing orbs and mists in their pictures, even shadowy figures sometimes. And the tour guides, they share their own stories, too.
That adds a whole other layer to it.
Yeah.
So it's not just the professional ghost hunters finding stuff.
Nope, regular people are having these experiences, too.
So we've got the Ghost Adventures crew, we've got everyday folks on these ghost tours. But what about TAPS, the guys from Ghost Hunters? Didn't they investigate the Stanley too?
They sure did. Jason Hawes and Grant Wilson back in 2006. And their findings were pretty interesting, especially in room 401.
Room 401 again. What
Yeah.
happened this time?
Well, they said a closet door started opening and closing all by itself. And then there were more EMF spikes, whispers, tapping sounds. One of the team members even had their jacket tugged by something they couldn't see.
Whoa, hold on. Now, that's hard to explain away, even for a skeptic.
Yeah.
It seems like room 401 is the epicenter of activity at the Stanley.
It really does. Some people think it might be connected to Lord Dunraven. He was the original owner of the land where the Stanley was built.
Interesting. So his spirit might be hanging around, maybe tied to that specific room.
Possibly, yeah. Maybe he's got some unfinished business or a strong attachment to the place.
So we've got unexplained noises, EMF readings,
Mhm.
things moving on their own, even physical contact.
Yeah.
It's a lot to process. But what about other methods of investigation? I've heard they've used those spirit boxes at the Stanley with, like, mixed results.
Oh, yes, spirit boxes. They've been used in several investigations there. And the results. Intriguing, for sure, but also controversial. Like during one session in the concert hall, they picked up a voice saying, Flora, clear as day.
Flora, as in Flora Stanley.
That's what they think, yeah. And then there was another session. This time in room 217, they captured phrases like, get out and stay.
Room 217 always seems to be in the spotlight, huh? But those spirit boxes are pretty unreliable, right? I mean, couldn't it just be random radio noise that people are interpreting as voices?
Yeah, that's the big debate with spirit boxes. It's really hard to tell if it's actual spirit communication or just interference. Skeptics would say that people are hearing what they want to hear, like they're finding meaning in the randomness because they're already expecting something paranormal.
Right, like our minds are filling in the blanks. It's easy to get caught up in the moment, especially at the Stanley. But what about the photographs? I've seen some pretty creepy pictures from the Stanley.
Ah, yes, the photographic evidence. There are some compelling ones out there. One famous one shows this faint figure on the grand staircase. It looks like someone in old-fashioned clothes just standing by the banister.
Okay, that's pretty creepy. Any others?
There's another one taken by a tourist on a ghost tour. It shows a little girl dressed in an old-fashioned dress on the 4th floor.
Isn't that where people always hear the children laughing?
Exactly. It adds another layer to that whole mystery.
Those photos, have they been analyzed, like, professionally? Could they be fake or something?
Of course, skeptics would want to look for things like double exposure or lens flares, anything that could explain those strange shapes. And they'd also consider the context, like where the photo was taken, the lighting, all of that.
So basically, it's not always clear-cut when it comes to paranormal evidence.
Not at all. There are always different interpretations.
Well, this is all incredibly fascinating. We've covered so much already. Ghost adventures, TAPS, those spooky ghost tours, even spirit boxes and photos.
We're just getting started.
I know, right? But before we move on, I think it's time to take a step back and look at the theories behind all of this. What could actually explain why the Stanley Hotel is so haunted?
Yeah, let's delve into those different perspectives and see what we can make of it all.
All right, so we've talked about all this crazy evidence, but what does it all mean? What are the actual theories behind why the Stanley Hotel is so active?
Well, there are a few different theories that paranormal investigators use to try and understand these hauntings. One of the most common ones is the idea of residual hauntings.
Residual hauntings, what's that all about?
Basically, the theory is that really strong emotions or like major events can leave behind an energy imprint, like a sort of echo of the past.
So like a recording.
Yeah, kind of. And these imprints, they can replay themselves over and over again, creating those classic haunting phenomena, apparitions, sounds, even smells.
So it might not be an actual ghost, but just a recording of what happened in the past.
Exact. Like think of a video on a loop just playing over and over. And this theory could explain some of those repeating things at the Stanley, like Flora's piano playing or the children laughing. Maybe those are remnants of the joy and energy from way back when.
That's really interesting. But what about those experiences that seem more, well, interactive, like people getting touched or things moving around?
Right. That's where the theory of intelligent hauntings comes in. This is the idea that the phenomena is caused by, well, actual conscious entities, spirits, if you will, and these spirits can interact with us.
So unlike residual hauntings, with intelligent hauntings, there's like a real presence there, something that's aware and making choices.
Exactly. And this theory might explain some of the more personal things that have happened at the Stanley, like that TAPS guy getting his jacket pulled or those alleged spirit box responses.
Definitely a creepier thought than just an energy recording. Are there any other theories that could explain things at the Stanley? I remember reading something about stone tape theory. What is that
Oh,
exactly?
yeah, the stone tape theory. That one's pretty interesting. The idea is that materials like stone and wood, they can actually absorb human energy and emotions over time, kind of like, well, a tape recorder.
So, the Stanley itself, being over 100 years old and built with lots of stone and wood, could be holding on to all those energies from everyone who's been there.
That's the thinking. And some people believe that the high electromagnetic energy in Estes Park, from the Rocky Mountains, might make it even stronger. Like it amplifies things, making the Stanley a prime spot for paranormal activity.
Wow, that's wild. So we've got these different theories, leftovers from the past, actual spirits, energy-absorbing walls. It's pretty mind-blowing. But we have to talk about the psychological side of things too, right? Like, people go to the Stanley expecting it to be haunted. Doesn't that influence what they experience?
Oh, absolutely. Psychology plays a huge role in how we perceive things, especially in a place like the Stanley. The power of suggestion is a real thing.
So like a creaky floorboard or flickering lights, those could freak someone out more because they're already primed to expect something spooky.
Yeah, exactly. Our brains are amazing at finding patterns, even when they're not really there. And in an environment like the Stanley, well, let's just say our imaginations can run wild.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
But even with all these possible explanations, there's something so captivating about the Stanley Hotel. It's a place that just draws you in.
It's true. There's something about the Stanley that continues to fascinate us, even as we try to rationalize it.
Speaking of captivating, we can't talk about the Stanley without mentioning its connection to Stephen King and, of course, The Shining.
Ah, yes, The Shining. It's become such an integral part of the Stanley story, cementing its place in pop culture and the horror genre.
It's amazing to think that one overnight stay could inspire such a terrifying and iconic story. Do you want to tell us a bit about King's experience at the Stanley? How did The Shining even come about?
Sure. So back in 1974, Stephen King and his wife Tabitha, they were the only guests at the Stanley Hotel right before it closed for the winter. They stayed in, you guessed it, room 217.
Room 217 again. What was it about that room?
Well, even before King got there, room 217 already had a bit of a spooky reputation. Staff would talk about all sorts of weird stuff happening in there.
Right.
Just strange occurrences, unexplained noises, that kind of thing. And the story goes that King had this incredibly vivid dream while he was staying there. He saw his son being chased down the hallway by a fire hose. Pretty terrifying stuff.
Yikes, that's a nightmare I wouldn't want to have. So that dream was the inspiration for The Shining.
It definitely played a big part. King woke up from that nightmare and looked out the window, and he could see the vastness of the Rocky Mountains. That image, combined with the dream, sparked the idea for the Overlook Hotel, this isolated, menacing place.
So the Stanley's isolation, plus that terrifying dream, it all just clipped together in his mind.
Pretty much. The Stanley, with its grand architecture and eerie atmosphere, it became the blueprint for the Overlook Hotel in The Shining. He even used the Stanley's topiary gardens, although they were much smaller back then, as inspiration for the Overlook's famous hedge maze.
And now the Stanley actually has a hedge maze modeled after the one in the film.
It's true. Life imitating art, as they say. It's a huge tourist attraction now, drawing shining fans from all over.
It's fascinating how fiction can have such a tangible impact on a real place. It's like the Stanley and the Shining are permanently intertwined.
They are, in a way, and the Stanley has embraced it fully. They have those ghost tours that focus on the book and the movie, and they even throw a shining ball every October where people dress up as their favorite character.
It sounds like a lot of fun. But The Shining is just one piece of the Stanley's pop culture legacy, right?
Right. The Stanley has been featured in tons of documentaries and paranormal investigation shows, shows like Ghost Hunters and Ghost Adventures, to name a few. And that's introduced the hotel to a whole new generation of ghost enthusiasts.
It's like a chain reaction. The more attention it gets, the more intrigued people become, and then the stories just keep spreading.
Exactly. And with every new investigation, every spooky story that comes out, the legend of the Stanley Hotel just keeps growing.
But the Stanley's impact on pop culture goes beyond just being haunted, right? I mean, it's that classic image of a grand, isolated hotel with dark secrets, a place where anything could happen. It's influenced a lot of horror stories.
Oh, for sure. The Stanley has become like the archetype for haunted hotels in movies and books.
Think about it. Movies like 1408 with John Cusack. A guy gets trapped in a haunted hotel room. It's totally drawing on that Stanley vibe.
Or The Innkeepers.
Right.
Two employees at a closing hotel encounter all sorts of ghostly activity. And don't forget American Horror Story, Hotel. That whole season was a twisted take on the haunted hotel theme. You can see the Stanley's influence all over it.
It's like the Stanley set the standard for what a haunted hotel is supposed to be. This grand, imposing building shrouded in mystery and a sense of dread.
It really has, and that's a testament to the power of the Stanley's story and how it captures our fascination with the unknown.
So where does the Stanley Hotel rank among all the famous haunted places in the world? I mean, it's got to be up there, right?
Oh, absolutely. The Stanley is definitely one of the most well-known haunted locations in the world. It's right up there with the Queen Mary, that massive haunted ocean liner, and the Crescent Hotel, another historic hotel with its own share of ghost stories.
The Stanley is in a league of its own, attracting tourists and paranormal investigators from everywhere.
And with every new piece of evidence, every chilling story, the mystery just deepens. It's a place that sparks so much curiosity, so much debate, and a real desire to understand what's going on there.
It makes you wonder, why the Stanley Hotel specifically? Out of all the haunted places in the world, why has this one captured our imagination so strongly?
That is a really interesting question. What is it about the Stanley that draws people in? Is it just the sheer number of paranormal encounters? Or is there something more to it?
Maybe it's that unique atmosphere.
Yeah.
It's elegant, but also eerie. Like it exists in this weird space between reality and imagination.
And we can't forget about the Stephen King connection, how The Shining has blurred the lines between fact and fiction.
It could be all of that combined,
Yeah.
right? The history, the mystery, the allure of the unknown. It all comes together to make the Stanley Hotel this incredibly captivating place.